The works of Josephus. Now I know this is probably going to seem like an extreme departure from some of the material I've been talking about, but it's actually not, or at least I don't think it is. I personally think the works of Josephus should belongs in every complete library. And true to form, you'll see the requisite dog-eared pages. And that dog-eared section is the section on the, let's see, apologize, I feel ill-prepared. Josephus's original writings were all from the 1st century AD. So the focus that I think is particularly interesting is the destruction of the temple described in the Wars of the Jews, book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, the siege of the temple, all of that. I think that account of the destruction of the temple and the siege of Jerusalem, all of that, in light of the writings of John, the Gospel of John, and of course the Book of Revelation and all that, I think the writings of Josephus, I think, are very important works. Basically, this is a first-hand account from the 1st century AD of the destruction of Jerusalem. This was the uprising of the Jewish zealots against the Roman Empire, and this was around 70 AD. And when they decided they were going to try to take Jerusalem back and declare their sovereignty over Jerusalem. And they briefly did. They basically ran out the Romans, took control of Jerusalem, but then it turned bad because then Rome surrounded Jerusalem and basically threw everything they had at it, and then pushed everybody surviving into the temple compound, which resulted in a standoff that then, as is described in here, became a massive and total bloodbath, resulting in, of course, the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. I think that is one of the most pivotal moments of the modern era. I don't know if that'd be fair to call that the modern era, but I think that is the tipping point that created what we now know as the modern era. Let's put it that way. Really, really fascinating stuff. If you are a Bible scholar of any type, reading the works of Josephus really gives a fascinating outlook on, again, from a secular perspective of 1st century history. And I'm going to go off on a little bit of an aside here and then call it quits on this, but one of the things I found really fascinating in researching all of the occult criminal activity and weird stuff that I dig around in, and looking up the writings of stuff like Josephus, is when you look at world history. I have a good friend of mine out in California, older gentleman who is real into pre-Columbian art and history, and we were talking about some of this, and what's really fascinating is that every continent on the globe, every continent had some form of human sacrifice practiced openly, brazenly, as a key component of its rituals, of its daily, I wouldn't say daily life, but it was an accepted part of every major culture on the globe up until a certain point. And I find this really interesting that you can find archaeological evidence and historical evidence of human sacrifice being a critical part of all these different societies. And these were advanced societies. We're not talking about little fragmented tribes out in the rainforest. We're talking about like the Mayans and the Incas and the Druids and all kinds of different people that all had some form of human sacrifice as part of their culture. and then it stopped. And that, to me, what's compelling to me is that you had sacrifice up until a point, and then it stopped. And it stopped globally. Now, I don't think it all stopped at exactly the same moment, but it all stopped. And now that's not to say that we don't still have little fragmented groups of people performing sacrifices, possibly human sacrifices. But the idea in modern culture of a society that openly kills a human being as part of a ritualized activity to achieve some political or spiritual end is not acceptable. You could find your most secular person on the street you can find, and they would, or even the most religious, and they would say there is absolutely no reason to be killing a goat or killing a person or whatever to achieve some end. That idea is reprehensible unanimously, from atheists to the most religious person. And I find that really interesting. I'm curious your thoughts on any of you who have ever looked into this sort of thing, what your thoughts might be on that. I have my own thoughts that, but I'm going to hold on to those for now and just say I find that to be a really fascinating bit of trivia, that you have human sacrifice practiced openly through human history right up until, again, speaking in historical terms, relatively recently, and then it stopped. And again, I'm not saying it stopped wholesale. Obviously, I believe there are little groups, splinter groups, but the regular average person would not tolerate the idea of somebody dragging someone up to a tall building in Washington, D.C. and saying, hey, we got to kill this virgin so that the next election cycle will go the way we want it to. Everybody would say that's insane. And when I was a kid, we were taught in our public school system here in Texas, and I'm sure elsewhere, the general attitude was, when we studied societies that had engaged in human sacrifice, was that they were basically, to paraphrase, that they were stupid, that they just didn't know any better, that they thought, well, if we don't kill a virgin on this day, on the solstice, the sun's going to disappear and we're all going to die. And so we got to do that. And then, oh, whoop, look, what do you know? Here comes the sun again. We're back in business. And then, oh, we need to do it again for the summer solstice, or it'll get too hot and we'll all die. And that explanation used to make sense to me to a point until I got a little bit older. And again, my friend out in California, that we were talking about this, and it's, the more you research those ancient cultures, the more you realize these people were not stupid. The idea that the Mayans did not understand the winter or summer solstice, and that they genuinely thought the sun wasn't going to come back, is laughable. I mean, the whole Mayan calendar thing, for instance, these were societies that had calculated dates and times well into the future and with great accuracy. So the idea that they genuinely thought if they don't kill somebody that they're not going to get the sun for the next season of crops is laughable. So I'm curious, any of you out there that might have thoughts on that, of what you think about what do you think might have caused human sacrifice to fall out of favor? Now, I think it's good. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all, but I'm curious what you think about that, because you have the end of sacrifice with the Mosaic law. You have come to a screeching halt with the destruction of the temple in a fashion that has made it so that it could never happen again, with the destruction of the Levitical records and all as recorded by Josephus. So you have the end of animal sacrifices for, again, for Mosaic law. But then you also have, again, not saying this all happened at the same time, but you also have the end of human sacrifices as an accepted part of culture across the globe. So again, and I'm not putting this out as a blanket, I'm sure there's little exceptions here and there, but as a whole, we today as modern society would not accept the idea of a sacrifice for our benefit or for the crops or whatever, that people would find that reprehensible. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. But again, I think the works of Josephus, I only discovered these just about, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've been sucked in ever since. I think there's a lot to digest here as it pertains to, again, kind of what I perceive is that I think the destruction of the temple is that pivotal moment that created Western civilization as we know it. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. A little bit of a departure, but kind of, sort of not.